Now, children with potentially life-threatening eating disorders are not being given proper access to care. It's a problem that's growing as demand for services increases. In the year from 2016 to 2017, more than 5,000 children and young people began treatment for eating disorders. And last year, that number more than doubled to nearly 12,000. The government advises urgent cases should begin treatment within 1 week. But last year, the reality was that 45% of those were waiting more than 12 weeks. And we're joined now by mental health campaigner Hope Virgo, who's in recovery from an eating disorder. Hope, thanks very much for joining us. So these figures are a surprise, not a surprise, but what do you think?
Yeah, definitely not a surprise to me. So I work kind of full-time campaigning and do a lot of work in schools. And this is something that I have seen kind of reflected in my day-to-day work. The amount of messages I get on a day-to-day basis from parents and carers of their loved ones who are struggling with an eating disorder, who are just unable to access that support and treatment. But what I'm hoping that this report will do is will just act as that stark reminder to the government, to the rest of society, that eating disorders are serious mental health issues and we need to step up our game and actually start tackling them as a matter of urgency.
Yeah, we've heard you speak about early intervention before on 5 News. So what practical steps could be made for people?
Well, I think the first thing is we need funding. If I'm honest, I hate talking about funding too much, but without the funding, we cannot meet the demand of those people who are struggling, and we need that as a matter of urgency, just that urgent injection into it to meet the current demand. And then beyond that, we need to be looking at actually how can we be training all frontline staff to understand eating disorders, and then also what's the role of schools within this. Yes, schools cannot pick up the pieces, but we know at the moment that school nurses are swamped with people coming to them who have eating disorders. They're left there to try and navigate this situation and support that person during that limbo phase. But we need to make sure the right funding is in place for them, but also that they have the skills and the expertise to actually be supporting that individual during that time as well. And then I think beyond that, kind of looking at more broadly prevention, what can we do to prevent people developing eating disorders? How can we really properly understand them and then stop them escalating to a point where an individual needs to have that hospital treatment?
In your case, Hope, are you able to rewind and think back to, actually, that would have really helped me then if somebody had done this? Or would you have been angry or in denial about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess as a bit of background, so I developed an eating disorder when I was about 12, 13 years old. And I actually hid it for around 4 years from everybody around me. To me, the eating disorder was like this best friend. It numbed all this emotion. It gave me this sense of purpose. And I thought that it was like this magical solution to life because I felt so wrong in who I was. Looking back, I think the only way to stop me having a hospital admission would have been if someone had stepped in that at an early point, whether that was a teacher, whether that was a friend. But I think back when I was growing up, I'm now 33, and no one talked about eating disorders like they do nowadays. So I honestly think the way forward with this is for people to have these honest conversations at an early point. Go with your gut. If you think someone's struggling, have that conversation immediately. And then we can get in there before their brain chemistry continues to change due to the change of food behaviors as well. But I do just want to also caveat that with, and you mentioned the word denial a moment ago, that actually a lot of people who have eating disorders will be in this complete state of denial about it. And it's really difficult to get through to them when they're struggling, particularly
Yeah.
if they've had that behavior for a long time.
Well, that was my next question. What's your advice to parents tonight if, 13-year-old Hope had said, a 13-year-old had said, there isn't a problem, leave me alone, you're worrying about nothing. So what do they do then?
The first thing is you have to try and be patient and have that conversation again a couple of weeks later, doing it in a way where you're not focusing on the food, you're not focusing on the kind of behaviors around the food, but you're having a conversation about actually how that individual is feeling on a day-to-day basis. I think it's really, really important, despite the fact that we know services are massively overstretched and overrun at the moment, to go and have a conversation with your GP, with your young person as well. I always say to people that if you've got a GP that you've got quite a good relationship with, you can always ring them ahead, kind of brief them on what you're going to have the conversation with so that they are on board before you take that young person. And then again, just keep being persistent in those conversations, keep talking about it, keep bringing it out into the open. And remember that your job as a carer is not not to fix that individual. I know for me, whenever my mum tried to fix the situation, I would put up my barriers. It would make it much harder for both of us. So just being there alongside that person. And I think as well, just quickly kind of on that, again, it's also important if you've got particularly a loved one who has something like anorexia, that you're making sure that they're fueling themselves and having the food as well, because we know without that, their brain will not recover as well.
And just quickly back on funding, Hope, you had that historic march, the petition. Are you
Yeah.
optimistic that things are going to change, or is it still a big battle?
It depends when you ask me, honestly.
I'm asking you
I
now.
think right. Yeah, so today I feel like because of this report coming out, I think it is a positive step forward, and I think the government will see this report. My fear with this report and with all of the conversations that we're having at the moment around eating disorders is that people have this fixation on eating disorders being something that only affects children. So I'd say potentially for young people, we might be feeling a little bit more positive about the conversation changing, about the funding going into services. But with adults, the conversation is just not happening. And we know that adults are being forgotten and left out of this kind of whole conversation at the moment. And so for me, that is still an uphill battle and something that I'm going to continue to try and challenge and try and change. Because I think
Yep.
unless we keep this moving and the momentum going, we're going to get to a point where people are not going to be able to access services at all.
Thanks so much. As always, Hope, thanks so much for your time. Hope Virgo there.
Thank you.